It really seems like I can't avoid stumbling into mysteries. In this case, this seemingly simple HP Jornada 680e is hiding more than a few secrets, and in truth, I didn't even pick this up with the expectations there was anything special about it. All I intended it was for use as a mobile platform for the game NetHack. On that note, this is your host NCommander, and today I've stepped knee deep in yet another weird eBay purchase. Now, if I have any viewers from the Netherlands, there's a good chance that they have recognized the twin arrow logo on the front of the device. If not, then this sticker on the bottom of the Jornada gives away who originally owned it. Since I suspect the vast majority of my viewers do not speak Dutch, I'll just skip ahead to the translation and tell you that this specific Jornada was owned by the Dutch National Railway System. While a corporate-owned device isn't that special in and of itself, what I couldn't figure out is why the vast majority of information about this model of handheld comes from 2005. The stickers on the device and the HP service manual clearly indicate that it was made in or around 1990, so why is there a 6-year gap before the internet seemingly became aware of the 680e? To solve that mystery, I would find myself in a rather strange web of misinformation and false trails before finally coming to what I believe is the truth. Before I dig into this mysterious 680e, let me talk about the Jornada line of handhelds to give some context. The Jornada line was essentially the pinnacle of late 90s mobile technology and could easily be seen as one of the ancestors to the UMPC handhelds and other PC replacement devices that popped up through the 2000s. The Jornada series was also part of what Microsoft called its handheld PC specification, which were devices running Windows CE and intended as PC companions. However, in practice, these handheld PCs operate more like a freestanding device due to the relative sophistication of Windows CE over its competition, as well as the power of the integrated Pocket Office productivity suite. For the right type of user, a Jornada could easily replace a laptop, and why shouldn't it? At the heart of my Jornada 680e is a 133MHz Hitachi Super H3 processor, which, when combined with its 16 megabytes of memory, is quite a lot for a handheld. Just to top it all off, the Jornada line supported add-in PCM-CIA cards, which could add networking support or additional storage as needed. In short, it's everything an aspiring road warrior might need in the palm of their hand, assuming of course that they were willing to pay the price. At $900 in 1999, or just slightly more than $1,400 in 2021, the Jornada was an expensive purchase to say the least. This isn't helped by a relatively weak application ecosystem compounded by poor marketing and relatively little developer buy-in. As such, both the Jornada and CE devices in general would play second fiddle to Palm OS through the early 2000s. However, that was 2 decades ago, and now I can finally afford to own one of these bad boys. My particular Jornada was found on eBay and was sold by usedhandhelds.com in working condition. In total, I paid $101 and what ultimately arrived was a nondescript box with the handheld, a manual, CDs, and the main battery. Amazingly, the battery even holds a charge, which was not something I was expecting. All in all, everything was in good condition with one exception. The rubber feet on the bottom had deteriorated so badly as to liquidate and start leaving gunk whenever I set it down. I have since scraped these off, but I have yet to find good replacements. Any advice here is welcome. Beyond that, the only other issue I had is that the CR2302 backup battery was dead, but that was easy enough to replace. With the device good to go, let's do a hard reset and try the out-of-the-box experience. After watching the bright and colorful Jornada splash screen, we're dropped straight into a welcome wizard. Here, we can calibrate the resistive touchscreen, set the time and date, and enter owner information. Finally, we're dropped to a very Windows 95-like desktop complete with Start menu. From here, we can see most of the pre-installed software, which includes Pocket Office and some stuff that HP added on top. One thing to note is this voice memo program, because if you were to look up this device online, you would think that this feature was cut from the 680e. In fact, by performing such a search, you might come away with the impression that the 680e is a cost-reduced version of the Jornada 680, since features such as support for a docking cradle, the built-in modem, the voice memo feature, and a compact flash socket all appear to be missing. To be fair, at first glance, the internet does seem right. None of the hardware for these features appear to be present. However, if I take a small Torx screwdriver and pop off the bottom, lo and behold, there's the compact flash slot, and you can clearly see where the buttons for the voice memo feature should be. I also found through testing that there is indeed a microphone on the device. My voice is my passport. Verify me. My voice is my passport. Verify me. In addition, we can also see that the compact flash slot works perfectly, with the storage device showing up without issue. In short, almost all those missing features are actually present. We can also see that without the bottom cover, the Jornada is also a good half-inch shorter than it was. In fact, if we look at the official HP Jornada 600 series manual, the only difference listed between the base 680 and the 680e is the lack of internal modem. Since the cover has a Dutch Railways logo on it, it stands to reason that they were the ones to either cover it up or requested that HP do so, although I am really not sure as to why. I know this is a long shot, but if anyone who worked for Dutch Railways sees this video and knows, please leave a comment below since I am really curious. The thing is though, as far as I can tell, almost all pictures I could find of the Jornada 680e are those like my own with the same Dutch Railways plastic cover. In fact, besides the manual, I only found a small number of period-correct references to the 680e. Of those, only one of them went in-depth, which was a review in IT World Canada. Almost all the information on this device starts appearing in 2005, which, if I use the manual as reference, is 6 years after this device would have been released to market. Almost all these early discussions talk about how the 680e was available on TigerDirect.com, and amazingly, that listing is still up in 2021. We can see from the pictures that TigerDirect was indeed reselling the Dutch Railways 680e, which gives us a relatively good idea of where the vast majority of these devices came from, but that begs the bigger question. Why is there virtually no proof that the 680e was sold to the public? Beyond the IT World Canada review, what few other references to the 680e were essentially remarks made in passing, and I could not find any solid evidence that a normal 680e was ever released. That raises a rather curious question though. Was the 680e a special model for Dutch Railways, or is there something else going on here? After considerable digging, I think I found the answer to that. We know from both the Lost and Found sticker and the cover that my 680e was intended for life in Europe. It's also fairly common in industry that a large hardware purchase might have customizations made, and such a modified device could take the form of an alternate model number. Under normal circumstances, it would be reasonable to say that is what has happened here. However, I don't think that's the full story. First, if we look at the 680e's keyboard layout, it's not the same as a regular 680 keyboard. Instead, it's a modified layout to better support languages beyond English. The differences in key layout and printing means that an entirely new assembly line for this part would have to be created, and I can't imagine that Dutch Railways could have ordered enough devices to justify the manufacturing startup costs by HP. This is further backed by the fact that the key layout is not the QWERTY US international design that I would expect for a Dutch-specific device. Instead, it appears to be a custom layout that encompasses several languages into one design. However, while the hardware may be better suited for Europe, the operating system is not. As far as I can tell, English is the only supported language built into the firmware. Windows CE did support localization and internationalization, but it wasn't exactly a standard feature. Instead, language-specific support had to be built into a given CE device through Platform Builder at manufacturing, and that in turn would require either larger ROMs or a specific ROM per language. I should note that when I say ROM, I do mean read-only memory. The Jornada uses mask ROMs and not any type of flash memory. That means to change the language would require creating a new physical chip. That's fairly common for the era, but it does seem rather odd to me that a customized device would be in English and not in Dutch. That is unless you take into account the Jornada 690. You see, the Jornada 680 was superseded by the nearly identical 690 only a year later, with the only difference between the 680 and 690 being the amount of onboard memory. In fact, the only real difference is that the 690 has a replacement ROM daughter board with additional RAM. I can also find proof that localized 690s were indeed sold in Europe. If there was a production delay due to either localization or manufacturing, it's quite possible by the time the 680E's European design was ready to go, it was already obsolete. My guess is that the decision to kill the 680E was made after the first production run had finished, but before it actually had gone on sale. There's also further evidence to back this theory. There are two versions of the Jornada 680 manual. The first only lists the 680 and 680E, while the one included in my box has the 680 and 690 as well as their E variants listed side by side. That meant that HP had intended all four products to be on sale at the same time. Although it wasn't easy, I did find some proof that a generic 690E indeed existed. It's also possible that a small number of generic 680Es were also sold through back channels. As for my very real 680E, well, that has an easy enough explanation. Companies hate having unsold products, and there was likely enough devices made that let HP sell them to Dutch railways instead of just writing them off. Due to the way that localization works in Windows CE applications, as long as an application was coded with Dutch messages, it should work properly even if the device's firmware was entirely in English. The rest, as they say, is history. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I can't prove this theory, and the honest truth is that unless an insider from HP or Dutch Railways comes forward, we'll likely never know for sure. With all that said, there's nothing here stopping me from enjoying my Jornada and giving you all a demo. Since it's intended as a PC companion, well, let's get the PC part sorted. For the time being, I've got Windows 95 installed on the ThinkPad 380D, and I've also installed Office 97 Professional. Just to get that last bit of authenticity, I also installed NT4 Server in a VM along with Exchange 5.5 and plugged that into Outlook. In short, it's the perfect picture of a turn-of-the-century Microsoft network. With the PC sorted, it's now time to install the software. The Jornada box came with two CDs, one with ActiveSync 3.0 and the other being branded as companion software. Well, I say CDs, but they're actually CDRs. I don't know if this is what was sold to Dutch Railways or if usedhandhelds.com included them, but that's what was there. The Jornada companion CD is primarily just a few add-on applications and trialware, and I didn't see anything really interesting on it. As for the ActiveSync CD, well, I'd love to tell you what was on it, but what I have is a coaster. Neither my ThinkPad nor the desktop is able to read the disk. On top of that, while ActiveSync would work with the Jornada, it's not what these handhelds would originally have used. For the time period, the Jornada 680 would have had Windows CE Services, which was the predecessor to ActiveSync. The manual also refers to this software. The term ActiveSync is actually used, but it's mostly used to refer to the actual synchronization process and not the software. Since I was kinda curious what these Windows CE services were like, I decided to track down a copy and load it onto my ThinkPad. After installation, I have a new mobile devices icon on the desktop. Now I just need to plug in the Jornada, right? Well, the sane and normal human would just plug in the provided serial cable, but you know what? Both my ThinkPad and the Jornada have infrared ports, and personally, I think IRDA is neat, so we're going full 90s hipster and full wireless. To use IRDA, I simply had to set the serial port in mobile devices correctly and then set communications in Windows CE to the infrared port. Then I just need to start PC Link, hit connect, and line up the ports, and then we get a stunning example of why IR networking didn't catch on, since the ports on these two devices are located on the same side. Still, it does work, and we get a prompt to set up the partnership between the machines. Since I kinda wanted to test everything, I told it to sync everything besides active desktop channels and then let it establish the initial partnership. After that's done, we can explore the Jornada's file system for mobile devices. This can be seen as an ancestor to modern-day MTP devices, but it's much more limited since we can only transfer files and look at properties. On top of that, file transfer does not work in the way one would expect. First, when you load a supported file to the handset, it gets converted to a Pocket version of that document, which we can see in the conversions menu. I have to assume that this is a space-saving measure since Pocket Office is capable of reading normal Office 97 documents. Documents are converted on the fly to and from their Pocket formats as needed, and items are automatically synced back and forth as long as they're in the synchronized files folder on either end. However, there is a fairly large caveat here. Pocket Office is a subset of regular Office, and certain features do not exist in it. CE services will warn if a document cannot be converted without losing information. It seems that anything beyond a very simple document will trigger this warning. For instance, I was able to copy one of my scripts, and it automatically converted to the Pocket Word format without issue. However, a document with a piece of clip art got flagged. Interestingly, by accepting the warning, I could open the clip art file on the Jornada and view the embedded image, so it's not entirely clear what may or may not be lost during a transfer. Just for reference, here's the original document before I transferred it to the Jornada. After making a small edit and transferring it back, we can see that the key is no longer in the same position. Due to the way that synchronization works, I could easily see that complex documents could get mangled through this process. The same problems also plague Pocket Excel. Here, I made a simple spreadsheet in regular Excel with some browser user statistics, and I didn't use any fancy formatting. Despite the document's simplicity, it also triggered a loss of information warning. However, I couldn't see any visible damage when looking at it on the Jornada. As for Pocket PowerPoint, well, usability here entirely depends on how you define it. Based on the resolution prompt that I got when copying files, this feature was entirely intended for use for displaying presentations on external displays. The good news is that even relatively complex slide decks appear to transfer without issue, so if you intend to use your Jornada to simply review and practice slideshows, it would work perfectly. Editing on the go? Not so much. What's sad is that it's still somewhat better than Pocket Access. Access, for those who aren't familiar with it, is essentially a simple database application that acts as a front end to Microsoft's Jet engine. Access files cannot be directly copied across. Instead, you need to explicitly import or export databases through Windows CE services. I did try exporting some example databases from Access, but every attempt generated a warning that some attribute or table failed to export. I am guessing that to make this feature work properly, the table schema had to be specifically designed for replication to and from Pocket Access. In theory, it's possible to keep databases in sync between devices, but considering the complexity of SQL multi-master replication, I truly question how well this could work in practice. The Pocket Access application itself only supports table manipulation and SQL queries, and it has no support for Visual Basic for applications, which was one of the major uses for Access. In truth, I think this program is primarily intended for other CE applications that want to talk to a Jet database and is not really intended as a companion to the regular Access application. It honestly feels more like a developer tool than anything actually useful. As for Pocket Outlook, well, that's a different story. On its own, this version of Pocket Outlook has support for POP3 and IMAP4 servers, although strangely, Exchange support is missing in action. This would allow an internet-connected Jornada to simply send and receive email on its own without a companion PC. It seems that this was the intended way to use Pocket Outlook, since otherwise it complains about unsent email when exiting. In lieu of a network connection, it's also possible to have Pocket Outlook simply copy the data to and from regular Outlook. When configured like this, most information in Outlook such as tasks, the calendar, and address book will copy across and stay in sync between the two devices. One strange quirk is that only unread email is copied across with no apparent option to change that behavior. Furthermore, this is the only way to use Exchange mailboxes with this version of Windows CE. However, the level of integration with Exchange here is both relatively low and somewhat buggy. For one, I had to install the Office service packs to get this to work at all. Secondly, things like Exchange's global address book is not synchronized, and this makes sending emails from Pocket Outlook much harder than it should be. Third, as you may have noticed, I did somehow manage to end up with duplicate emails in the inbox. That being said, it all does appear to work, as we can see here that the administrator user did receive my test email. I do wonder how many of these issues are related to my use of Windows CE services and not the later ActiveSync software. However, CE services is what would have been in the box, and that's what a new Jornada user would have experienced unless they knew in advance to find and download ActiveSync from Microsoft.com. Furthermore, many of the limitations I ran into are problems with Pocket Office itself, and that's a much larger hurdle to overcome since they're burnt into the ROM chip and cannot be directly upgraded. The Jornada 720 released in 2000 would include the revamped Handheld PC 2000 with updated applications, but the Jornada 600 series would never receive a ROM replacement option to upgrade. While it seems that I'm being pretty critical of Pocket Office, in truth, I find the applications themselves to be perfectly serviceable. It's only when taking into account the conversion to and from regular Office where you start running into problems. However, this is more due to the fact that even Microsoft was not immune to the fact that the Office of this era did not play well with anything. I am fairly certain that there are other Palm OS users who remember Documents to Go routinely shredding files. However, I am also getting to what is one of the largest problems of the platform. In general, CE devices act as though they were an island, with data synchronization essentially being tacked on as an afterthought at best. That's in contrast to Palm handhelds, whose hot-sync technology was the undisputed king in this era. So, with all that taken into account, how do I feel about the Jornada? Well, I think it's a solid piece of hardware, and in general, I liked using Windows CE as a user, although I have a special place reserved for it in the pit as a developer. A large part of this is due to the fact that the primary development tool, Embedded Visual C++, can best be described as an existence meant to spite developers. That impression was reinforced through the sheer number of hoops that I had to go through just to make that Hello World demo for this video. Unfortunately, I don't think my suffering here has ended. For one, the last version of NetHack for CE is several versions out of date, so I want to see if I can compile something newer. And secondly, well, I sort of have this insane idea of turning my Jornada into a bulletin board system and putting it on the internet for all you guys to poke at for a few weeks. If I end up doing it, there's a decent chance that I'll make a video on it or live stream the process, since it seems that most people enjoy watching my pain and suffering. In a broader sense, I'd also like to explore the larger CE ecosystem in the future and perhaps even dive into the Jornada's slightly surprising cousin, the Sega Dreamcast, which shares a Super H processor as well as the ability to use Windows CE. The CE story for the Dreamcast is an amazing train wreck, and I may see if I can somehow borrow a Katana SDK just to make such a video that much more interesting. It's on that note that if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe for more NCommander suffering. In other news, most of you seem receptive to me launching a Patreon, so ta-da, it's up and running. I might set one of the first goals to actually do that CE BBS project. I also hope to do a live stream in the near future where I suffer through more Debian madness. Anyway, let me know your thoughts below, and as always, this is NCommander signing out and wishing you all a pleasant day.